Today, about an hour ago, very dramatic news from Turkey, and I want to examine this dramatic development in Turkey's Kurdish conflict. The PKK's announcement issued today, say about an hour ago, that it will withdraw all its forces from Turkey into northern Iraq, signals a profound shift in both the insurgent strategy and the state's approach. This announcement prompts us to ask, is this merely symbolic, or does it represent a genuine endpoint of the armed chapter and a pivot to politics? And what are the consequences domestically, regionally, and in law? The PKK has waged an insurgency against the Turkish state for more than 40 years, with tens of thousands of casualties. Earlier in 2025, the PKK formally declared it would renounce armed struggle and disband its organizational structure. At the same time, the imprisoned leader Abdullah Öcalan issued a call for democratic politics rather than arms, and the signals had been that this would be a transition from violence to political engagement. Indeed, analysis emphasizes that the PKK attempted to transform and integrate into domestic politics, into democratic politics, rather than exile. However, in May 2025, the PKK publicly rejected the idea of its members being forced into exile from Turkey, insisting that it intended to remain in the Turkish political ecosystem. And the key announcement today that the PKK is implementing the withdrawal of all our forces within Turkey and moving them to northern Iraq is significant. At a ceremony in the Kandil area in northern Iraq, the group presented fighters who had arrived from Turkey, 25 men, 8 women, or 25 units, 8 women among them. And importantly, the statement also called on Ankara to pass the necessary legal and political steps to integrate the Kurdish political movement to facilitate democratic participation and not just offer an amnesty. Symbolically, this is a significant step because until very recently the PKK insisted on staying within Turkey and participating politically from there. The shift to withdrawing forces signals that the armed geography of conflict is changing, perhaps decisively. So earlier this year, the PKK actively resisted any notion of forced exile. In May, a spokesperson said our members should not become exiles as a result of any future peace deal with Ankara, and that suggests the organization saw its future in Turkey, not abroad. The concept of political participation within Turkey was central. Now, its announcement to withdraw its forces from Turkey to move them to northern Iraq may indicate that the strategy of internal political engagement has reached a dead end, or at least the PKK has lost confidence in staying inside Turkey's armed terrain. In effect, the departure of fighters constitutes a sort of self-exile, contrasting strongly with the earlier slogan of "We want democratic politics inside Turkey." For the Turkish state, this gives Ankara a strong symbolic win. The adversary is leaving Turkish territory, which allows the state to claim that its internal security space is normalized. For the President Erdogan and his coalition, this is a potential political asset. For the Kurdish movement, the PKK is signaling that the armed phase inside Turkey is over, but withdrawal into Iraq also puts its fighters outside the domestic political sphere, raising questions of reintegration, representation, and relevance. For peace prospects, the announcement hinges on legal and political reforms in Turkey. The PKK explicitly calls for laws specific to the process, not just an amnesty. Without such reforms, the movement risks marginalization. For the region, the relocation into northern Iraq underscores the cross-border dimension of the Kurdish question. It raises questions about Iraqi Kurdistan's role, Turkey's operations across the border, and the regional balance of Kurdish politics. For the politics of exile and return, the fact that the PKK first rejected exile and now initiates a withdrawal into exile suggests a reframing of what exile means, perhaps a relocating operational capacity to Iraq while planning political activity inside Turkey if legal space opens. Announcements, of course, are one thing, implementation entirely another. Will all forces truly withdraw? Who verifies this? What becomes of those remaining within Turkey, political actors, exiles and prisoners? The reintegration plan remains vague. Will the Turkish government deliver the promised legal political changes? Analyses warn that without trust and robust reforms, relapse to conflict is highly possible. So how will this affect Kurdish politics in Turkey broadly? Will former fighters participate in elections, civil society, or will they remain sidelined outside the state's institutional space? Finally, what of the hardliners within the PKK group or other groups who might reject the shift? Insurgencies sometimes fracture when transitions of this scope occur. The PKK's announcement marks a landmark moment, with the withdrawal of forces from Turkey to northern Iraq signals both the end of the armed campaign on Turkish soil and the beginning of an uncertain political chapter. For the first time, the PKK is effectively renouncing its domestic rear bases and fighting ground inside Turkey and repositioning itself externally. Yet much depends on whether Ankara seizes the opportunity to reform and to integrate Kurdish political demands meaningfully. For observers, what matters now is not the ceremony, but the laws, the institutions, the reintegration, and the will. The question is, will this be a genuine transformation or a shuffling of geography?